Welcome to the Resilient Performance Podcast. This is Keep It Real episode number 17. This is going to be like a 2020 year in review and sort of a look forward to what 2021 has to offer, what sort of things we would like to do, goals that we have. And we're happy to kind of bid farewell to 2020 like most of you. So either of you guys want to take it and start it out?
Yeah, I think this has just been, for everybody, obviously 2020 has been like a difficult year in so many different ways. I just think for kind of reflecting on what this year has been and what I myself have learned from just like a business ownership standpoint, I think there was that chunk of time where we had signed our lease for the new space where Doug is kind of currently at. And, then we literally signed the lease, I think 10 days before the pandemic, was officially declared a worldwide pandemic. So the timing of that was obviously not ideal for us. And, getting all the equipment in and moving to the space and all that stuff just really threw a wrench in our plans for what we kind of envisioned 2020 to be. But I think for ourselves, I've become more confident in terms of what we can do as a business because we have navigated this, I would say, fairly well and kind of kept alive, kept swimming the whole time. And then we've kind of come out, what feels like we've come out the other end of it, which is, I would say it's kind of a relief, so to speak. But I think it's just been an interesting year that, so many things don't always go according to plan, and just being able to be adaptable, being able to be resilient and kind of like, if you have something you believe in, just to find a way to keep it going and keep pushing on.
Yeah, I think it kind of speaks to the idea of you can't, even periodization, where it's you're going to peak for this event. I think that this past year speaks to the fact that you can't really peak. I think that your preparation is the sum of everything that you've done up to that point in your life, not just what you did the last couple of weeks or couple of months. Because for us, we signed that lease right before COVID hit in New York, and at that point, New York was the epicenter of the pandemic. So imagine signing a lease for a facility 2 weeks before that happened. We weren't able to move into that facility until months later. We went 2.5 months without generating any revenue in New York. And we, at the time, we thought it was the perfect, before COVID was the perfect time for us as a business to get our own facility, possibly bring on a new employee. And then we took a big hit. And then on top of that, we all had personal stuff. My family had a child in the beginning of September. When I wanted to go back into New York to kind of get the New York practice going again in May. My wife had reservations about coming back to the city, which I understand. So for the last couple of months of her pregnancy, we weren't even living together. And then when we did come back to the city, I ended up having a back surgery a couple of weeks after my son was born. And then I had some more family health stuff. And so there's never, obviously you don't want to be totally unprepared for things, but there's never going to be a perfect opportunity or a perfect time to do certain things, because you can't predict all the unforeseen things that are going to happen that can just create all kinds of chaos in your life. And sometimes, especially in business, it just takes a leap of faith. You've got to trust kind of your preparation up to that point, but also recognize there's a lot of unknowns, a lot of uncertainties, and you're never going to feel 100% confident in what you're doing.
Yeah, and we're not necessarily the business experts. I think you guys would agree with us. We never really knew anything about business starting this thing, a few years back. And I think we still have a lot to learn.
For sure.
And that's why we're part of a business mentorship group, which is extremely helpful. You could have the perfect business setup and something can kind of blow it all up in your face. And was it a Mike Tyson quote is everybody's got a game plan until you get punched in the mouth or something like that. And that's very true in this situation with the pandemic, of course. But at the same time, we are very lucky that we are healthcare providers. So a lot of the people listening to this aren't, and they might have had to close their gym or had some, lost their job or something like that. So we're talking about our struggles, but it could actually be a lot worse. And we're very lucky that we are healthcare providers, so we were legally allowed to stay open for as comfortable as we were and our patients were, while taking precautions. So like I said, I just think that we're very lucky that we were able to do those things. And then same thing for me. I also had my second child this year. And it's the same thing when you have a young child or you have a pregnant wife. It's like you have to prepare for the worst, and you don't want to, you weigh risk and reward with everything. And now more than ever, you have to be very risk averse, like everything else that we try and do with our business. So that's been a big time hurdle, and I'm very, very excited that this vaccine is happening. 2 out of the 3 of us are scheduled currently. The other one is having a hard time actually getting onto a schedule for some reason, but we're excited for that to happen. Potentially that can, make people more comfortable with working with us in person if that's, something that people have reservations about. Because it's definitely been something where I've had a few patients who did stop coming indefinitely not because of themselves, but because of a grandmother they live with, or a mother, another family member that they live with who's at a high risk. So it'd be great if we were able to kind of continue to provide for people who can then feel comfortable and feel like they need our services. But yeah, so I'm excited for 2020
for
to
sure.
end.
For you guys, has this year made you more, like, overall from like a business standpoint, more or less risk averse? Because like for myself, I would say it's made me, I would say I've never been someone that is very risk averse, and I would say it's almost made me even more comfortable being not very risk averse, just because, like, I mean, I just remember like at the beginning of the pandemic, always like planning my schedule the week ahead of time or 2 weeks ahead of time and trying to like have a plan going ahead. And then you said, Doug, it's like all of a sudden you can't plan for anything and you have no idea what the next 2 days, 5 days, week, 2 weeks, month is going to really give you. It made me a lot more comfortable, like being like, whatever we want to do, we should do it now, because you have no idea what is really going to be happening kind of coming down the line, which is why, like we said, the timing of like signing the lease wasn't necessarily great timing, but I'm like very happy we did it, and thankfully it's worked out for us. But it's given us just, I think, some of the flexibility that we've always wanted, and it's still not where we were before the pandemic, but at least we're kind of climbing out of the hole. So I think it's been, I think one of the lessons that I've learned this year is kind of that of like, if you want it, like you got to kind of just go for it, because you really just don't know what is going to be happening down the line.
Yeah, I would agree. Like, I think we've always been a very lean business and tried to just kind of keep things simple and not too complex, and have them work easily, which is what's gotten us to where we are. And I would agree that I think it's like there's never a good time to do things, or maybe there's good times, but there's no perfect time. And then I keep seeing quotes pop up on social media about like, you have to do things, or essentially are all these different quotes. I can't think of them word for word, but like you can't do something if you're just thinking about it. You have to be a doer and make it happen. Otherwise it'll just kind of sit in your brain forever. And then I just keep thinking about that Michael Scott quote from Wayne Gretzky. So I think everybody probably knows what I'm talking about. But.
I don't know if they do, so maybe you should say it.
Actually, I couldn't even verbatim tell you what it is.
It's you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
You don't take.
Michael Scott.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect. So that's kind of, I think, the epitome of where we're at. And we definitely want to keep pushing forward and do what we're doing, grow a little bit like we have started to already with hiring another staff physical therapist, Nuja Gate. So she's done an amazing job working part-time in our New York facility. She's an unbelievable clinician, and I mean, I know you guys kind of get to see it in action a little bit more, or I mean, I don't get to see it, so I hope to be able to see it sooner than later, because you guys are just raving about how well she's doing with her patients. So yeah, definitely want to kind of go for it and do more things and take risks that are calculated, but essentially just not wait for the right time for things, and just kind of just keep plugging away and doing things. I
mean, anytime there's like chaos, there's also an opportunity. So there's a lot of opportunities now because the landscape of healthcare is changing, and there's things that we're trying to do that we were actually had in the works even before COVID, but are more relevant now. But it's also, I mean, you mentioned, Greg, that like a lot of the distinctions between like what's considered essential and not essential is arbitrary. So we're lucky in that we've always been healthcare providers. So even when we weren't working for those 2.5 months, it was more like voluntary. I mean, we probably could have. I know a lot of PT clinics in New York City were open and they weren't mandated to shut down. I mean, we at the time, because we didn't know how severe things were, we didn't want to contribute to the spread, and we kind of voluntarily shut down. And there wasn't a huge demand at that time because of how tense New York City was for people to come in regardless. But at the same time, there, as we talk about frequently, there's a lot of carryover between what we do and what, like, people in the fitness space or the strength and conditioning space do. But those places had to shut down for, a lot more than 2 months. But because we have this arbitrary PT license, we're considered essential. So it's easy for us to talk about, like, how we're more comfortable with risk because we didn't have to sacrifice as much either. So, there are opportunities, and we're trying to take advantage of those. And it always comes down to, like, you're never, if you're totally risk averse, just like in rehab, you're not going to achieve the outcomes that you want, but you don't want to be cavalier either. And we're trying to find that a reasonable place between those extremes. And I mean, it's a chaotic time, and it kind of reminds me, like, the alternative is that we didn't have this, we weren't working for ourselves, we'd work for somebody else, where we'd probably be furloughed anyway, and we'd have other people dictating our basically the fate of our lives, or at least the fate of the next couple of years. And so even though it's more stressful when something like this happens, and now, like, the three of us are the ones that have to get ourselves out of it, I would rather I would rather be responsible for getting myself out of it with people that I trust, like you guys, than working for probably a bigger organization that doesn't care about me that much, and then, like, I don't really have much control over it. So I guess if the shit's going to hit the fan, then I want to be I want to have some control over the fan.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think, like, it's been we are fortunate, I think, to, like, have gone through all this stuff together this year, because I would have probably been shitting my pants if I was all completely alone trying to figure out, like, what to do next, and what was going to kind of be going on. So I think having both of you guys, like I said, people who I, like, fully completely trust, like, definitely made going through this process a lot easier, and helped us all kind of figure out these problems together.
Yeah, I mean,
Definitely.
it was scary, like, especially in New York. I mean,
For
we
sure.
didn't know if the city was going to recover. We weren't sure if it even made sense to move into our new place. And then the reality was that the place we were working at went out of business. So if we had stayed there, then we'd have nowhere to work right now.
Right.
But it's not like we're out of the woods in New York. I mean, New York, might not go back to what it was for a long time. I mean, we're getting by, and it's kind of like the anti-fragile. As long as you survive, catastrophe, like, you don't need to always be thriving, but you have to survive and not go bust. And that's kind of where we're at. Like, let's just not go bust. And then as long as you're in the game, then good things can happen. So that's what we're trying to do.
Absolutely.
Definitely. And then 2021, what does it look like for Resilient? What do you guys want to do? What are we doing?
I think, obviously, like, we've kind of been talking out here about this whole conversation so far, is continuing to grow New York and hopefully getting it back to kind of where we were pre-pandemic, pre-COVID. But I think continuing to expand our online business, like, we're going to be launching our next course, Return to Sport, Acceleration and Agility, hopefully by the end of February is the goal that we have for it. So I think from that standpoint, from a business standpoint, continuing to grow the online educational resources that we've been putting out there is definitely key, because I've really enjoyed the stuff that we've been sharing over the last, I would say 18 months or so. And I think that's something that genuinely is, like, fun to produce, and it's fun to, like, kind of get those conversations going. So just continuing to do more of that. I would say for myself, from, like, a personal professional development education Con Ed standpoint, I hope to be able to take some actual courses in person this year. Just not being able to do that. I'm trying to think. I don't know the last time I went, whatever it's been, 10 months, 12 months without taking, like, a single Con Ed class in person. So it'll be hopefully nice to get some small groups together like we've done in the past, and, bring in some coaches, some other therapists, and talk about what they do. I know one of the things that I've always wanted to take and I have not done yet, I know people that have taken an in-person um, anatomy dissection lab. Oh, I think it's in Colorado. I gotta look up where it is. That's something I've always been interested in doing, and kind of like, there is no time like the present anymore, and not knowing when that stuff can happen again. So whenever that's available, that's something I would like to do. That's an area that I think I can always continue to make progress in. It's just my understanding of anatomy. So that's one of the courses I would hopefully be able to take in person again. And then I also want to take some more of the Spinal Manipulation Institute's courses as well.
Yeah, I think for me, things I'm working on, I want to do more programming, but not necessarily like for me personally. Like I find that when people want individualized programs, a lot of the times it's not that individualized. Like all of us, no matter what we say, we have a template from which we kind of operate, and then we might individualize certain pieces of it based on like taking history and someone's athletic background and their goals. But a lot of people, especially in sports, kind of have the same goals. Like they want to get faster, they want to change direction better, they want to jump higher, and then they want to be conditioned for their sport. And there's a lot of overlap in the field sports. So I think that there's been a much more of an emphasis throughout healthcare on like digital like telehealth and stuff like that. But I think that you can even scale better by I don't know if telehealth is a great substitute for in person, but I think there's a lot of things that people can do before they see a provider in person. And I think even we would all agree that like a lot of people that we see in our own practice, there's things that they could have done on the front end to even probably not need to come and see us. And I personally would enjoy the clinical experience a lot more. Like if I really reserved it for the more challenging cases and not just like, hey, your knee hurts, I'm going to show you a quad stretch that I've showed like 10 other people today. And so if there's a way to kind of deliver that information to people and make it more accessible so that maybe like they've tried certain things and now when they want to come in and see a healthcare provider, it's really a case where like, again, I think this whole COVID thing has forced all of us healthcare providers to figure out like what truly needs to be done in person, what can't be done, done remotely. And I think delivering like high quality, physical therapy at scale, remotely, digitally, but not necessarily saying this is individualized care, but like here's more of like a triage mechanism to determine like if you need in-person care. And I think that a lot of people with the right digital platform, I think it could save the healthcare system a lot of money and frankly, save individuals time and money as well. I mean, because a lot of times like third parties pay for healthcare transactions, we don't see the cost, but there is a cost to whether it's like an employer or the government. And then it's time too. I mean, I know for me personally, especially since having a kid, like I love the idea of going to a Con Ed course in person, but I can't imagine being able to like take an entire weekend to do that. So same thing with going to, like any kind of medical provider. I mean, if somebody told me like, hey, you've got to find another 3 hours during your week to go get physical therapy or some other thing, like I don't know if I'd be able to manufacture that unless it was like a really necessary or an emergency. So trying to deliver, like what we do in person, but at a much lower price point and make it more accessible to other people. And then even doing some programming where, for example, I work with a lot of military, folks who want to go to like different selection programs. But I've never actually sat down and written out like, here's what I think people need for various programs. I would like to do that and even maybe create, kind of to piggyback on what you're doing, Trevor, like even some off-season programming for various field sport athletes and incorporating some of the work that you have with some of like the some conditioning stuff. So like my emphasis lately for Con Ed has been mostly track and field based, kind of the far end of that return to sport continuum. I just signed up for Altus, just released kind of like more of an endurance based course. I'm curious to see, how they program for their endurance events and just some of their like technical considerations for distance running, because a lot of those military selection programs are very distance running based. I just took just went through and I'll make sure I'm pronouncing it correctly, the track and field consortium, Tony Holler and Chris Corpus course. I've been doing that for the last couple of years. And this most recent one, I mean, because it's been virtual, like they've had so many top level people. So I think that's one of the better Con Ed values for the price point. I just took an online course with Mike Young. And then what else? I've ordered a bunch of, one of our most recent podcast guests, Keir Wenham Flats. I've ordered his like tempo running template and his grappling and agility change of direction template. So going through that, and then just right now I'm kind of like trying to devour as much educational material as I can to kind of get some inspiration to, to create a little bit more programming. Like I have things, but I'm in a little bit of a rut where I want to kind of get out of my own way of doing things, expose myself to new ideas to hopefully have more, creative content to be putting out in the future.
That's freaking awesome. But yeah, going back to what you said about time, time is definitely something that is of the essence. It's hard to measure how much time I can actually spend on doing things that I really want to do. Having two children, and having to prioritize certain things, especially during a pandemic, where we wouldn't have necessarily like family members over to help us care for our children, which then puts more, added time onto to taking care of our own children. So self-care has kind of been in the dumps these days, but that's definitely something I want to get back to. And part of self-care is continuing education for sure. It's just on the back burner right now for me. And I like the idea of doing some more in-person things again, but like you did say, Doug, it's hard to have to spend a weekend away from your family when you've got one kid. I can't, there's plenty of people out there who do it and have multiple kids. So, having this second kid, I'm like, I don't know how anybody has more than one child. But I'm looking forward to being able to have people come into our home and help us take care of our children again, to kind of free up some more time to do some other things like Con Ed. And I want to look more into, I was asked by a physician, the assistant of a physician, to potentially do some research. So there might be some room to do some research on some of the things that I do. And it kind of just makes me wonder about some of the things I do, because there's not a lot of research on some of the things that I'm doing with a lot of my baseball players. So just kind of gets me interested in looking more into that, which could be that's very different. We don't do research. We're not researchers. So that could potentially be something different that I find interesting. I think getting more into some of the spinal manipulation stuff would be interesting as well, like Trevor said. And then, growing this online platform for us is one of my jobs for us. It's a part-time job for me, and I definitely think there's room for us to put out more programs, templates, some like easy to access content from us that we put together based on our experience, based on things we've learned from other people, other providers, other coaches, and then kind of how do we package it under our context and in our setting with the athletes, with the individuals that we work with. And then just in general, just creating more content. That's something that I think is very important to put out and to continue to consume, like you said, Doug. And then, just putting out more content for people to see what we do and share the things that we're doing that we're interested in. And then building up that garage gym, just like Trevor started today.
That's the next step, man. That's my next step here. Got to clean out the garage a little bit and then put some floor down, but then one step at a time.
There you go. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So.
And then I forgot, I do want to get more into Andy Ryland's contact prep stuff and some of the other content and courses he's put out through USA Football. I've just briefly looked at some of the other tackling certifications and stuff that he's done, and I find that stuff fascinating. From growing up playing football from third grade through college, is that kind of collision and contact stuff has always interested me, and I'm really excited to kind of spend more time actually going through what Andy's already put out, because I think there's so much place in that in terms of some of the athletic population that we work with, and not even necessarily in collision and contact sports like football and things like that, but even with my basketball players, I think there's so much physicality that people don't see in sport, and I think being able to grade that with the contact prep stuff that he's been doing is something I'm really looking forward to diving into more in 2021.
That's probably been what's changed the most for me in the last year, was some of the stuff that he put out, and actually just tweeted from our account about it. Andy tweeted something like, what's changed the most for you as a coach in the last year? And I responded and said, like, listening to you more, essentially. And he was, he made some funny comments about it being false, but I'm definitely doing a lot of some more of that contact prep stuff, like I've spoken about on here or in a blog post I wrote for our mailing list. Just about kind of how do we implement some of these contact prep things, and it does make sense for me to use it with other populations that aren't necessarily making contact, like a baseball player or thrower. So yeah, thank you to Andy, and definitely I think his information is going to be pretty useful for us going forward.
Yeah, he's the man too. He's just such a great guy, super honest, authentic about what he does. So we always appreciate people like Andy who just put out great content.
Yeah, and I think Kier's grappling and agility resource has a lot of that contact prep stuff. So
very cool.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to going through that. And then I think Andy's influence will be pretty apparent checking that out.
Yeah, I mean, right. We just want to share the stuff that we genuinely appreciate and value, all the different knowledge and educational resources. That's why, like, we talk about Lee Taft all the time, and so many other, and Derek Hansen, all these other coaches that have been such awesome resources for us, and given us so much of their time to really educate us, and that's the stuff that we just want to kind of continue to pass forward. Exactly, and thank everybody for their support with the podcast and all the different content that we put out. We hope you guys enjoy it. We really appreciate all the feedback that we get from you guys.
So that's it for this week's episode, and we look forward to having you again soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Resilient Performance Podcast. As a thank you for listening, we'd like to offer a 10% discount on our online products, which you can find at resilientperformance.com. We'd like you to use the promo code PODCAST, PODCAST, to get the 10% off. Right now we have the Resilient Movement Foundations course online format for you to purchase there. And we hope to grow that soon before the end of the year and have some other offerings. We hope you enjoy. Again, that's promo code PODCAST, PODCAST, for 10% off. Thanks.